Ross and Jono with you. Once again, we are returning to a program theme that we left a number of, I guess over a month ago, Ross. The last time we did a program like this was, I think we did Azazel. Prior to that, we did Nehushtan, right? Some of these mysterious, and before that, in the Nephilim, right? Some of these mysterious sort of, are they angelic themes? Are they personalities in the Bible that we're not really sure who they are and
they're beyond,
why and how?
They're beyond belief. Just kind of
beyond belief. There you go.
Beyond belief.
There it is. So we are returning to that, and this week we're going to be talking about the cherubim, cherubs.
Yep. Hey, what is? Let me ask you. Since you, I was just gonna. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'm just curious. You said it both ways. You said the typical English version. Like when I grew up as a little boy, I would read it in my English Bible, and I would say cherubim. And you pronounced it more the Hebrew word cherubim. So that's plural, right? So you've got cherub or keruv is the singular, and then you've got the plural cherubim, or as we would say in English, if we didn't know how to pronounce it, we would say cherubim. What is that? I mean, that's what we're going to get into today. What in the world is a cherub or a keruv?
It's a naked little baby. It's a naked little squishy baby with a bow and arrow, Ross. Everyone knows that.
Did you see, by the way, is that a cool thumbnail or what? I mean, that is so cool. I almost went and told Seth, hey, make Jono's little cherub with longer legs and mine was shorter. But no, then I thought, no, we're perfectly sized in the angelic world that we would be cherubs. I think it's perfect. I loved it, didn't you?
Listen, it is a valid question, though. It is a valid question. What did they look like? What purpose do they serve? The Hebrew Bible is not so clear. So we're going to get into some of that. And it's difficult to know where to kick off for us. There's about 3 different places I'd like to start. Maybe where would you like to begin?
I tell you, let's do this. Let's at least start with the first biblical occurrence of the word. I think everybody knows of this particular text.
I like the way you said that. The first biblical occurrence. It's not necessarily the chronologically first mention, though it appears that way. When was that? When was this particular entry written is a question. Maybe we'll talk about that. I don't know, but I like the way you put that. So let's continue. We're going to kick off in Bereshit. We're going to start in Genesis, right?
Yep. Genesis chapter 3 and verse 24. Maybe we just start there. And if you don't mind, let me read from my brand new Bible, because I can already see that people are going to watch this and say, hey, wait a minute. He's reading from a Christian Bible. All right, so here we go.
One of these, except what Ross has is the 5th edition. I've only got the 4th. But I tell you what, these are handy. I mean, both of these Oxford editions are excellent. So this is Exodus chapter what?
No, Genesis chapter 3, verse 24.
Genesis chapter 3.
It says, He drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim and a sword flaming and turning to guard the way to the tree of life. So
got a lightsaber.
Yeah, that's right. So he's got this revolving sword. Now, the interesting thing, and let me look at this. I want to look at the Hebrew and just see, does it say, do you know right off the top of your head, does it use the plural? Does it say he placed there the cherubim, or does it say he placed there the cherub? I want to look at that.
That's a good question. I am going to.
It is plural.
It is singular.
No, it's
plural?
actually
it is.
plural.
It's cherubim. Yeah. Okay.
So think about this. He chases man out of the Gan Eden, out of the garden, and he places, guarding the way to the tree of life, these cherubim. Now, it's not...
is the lightsabers plural, or is that just singular? Are we to assume that each cherub has a lightsaber?
The sword, the revolving sword. It's singular.
Ooh, that's a share.
And
Okay.
and the cherub. Okay, so here's the question, Jono. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a couple of elements that would take us down the road in the biblical text, not necessarily chronologically, as you pointed out, but you remember there is a later tradition in Judaism, and we get a little bit of this in the book of Proverbs, isn't it? Where the Torah is described as a tree of life, and of course, according to tradition, we'll get a little bit more into the ark a little bit later, but the Torah is associated with the ark and the cherubim, and so you have cherubs and arks and Torahs. So what is a cherub or a keruv? Are they some type of living creature, angelic, that is associated with guarding? I mean, guarding the way...
This is a really good question. Obviously here, Ross, in this verse, it's a divine entity or a heavenly entity, it would appear, like an actual... it has a personality of sorts and evidently a lightsaber. So that's one description that we have. The thing is that there's multiple descriptions throughout the Tanakh, and obviously you're going to touch on each of those, but they're all different. And the purpose that seems to be assigned to them is kind of nebulous, but again, all different. We don't really have a specific description, do we?
Well, we don't, and you mean as far as their task goes, right? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, that's right. I mean, one thing a while back we touched on the seraphim, and I know I taught on this as well. And a seraph means to burn. So in Isaiah chapter 6, where it talks about he has this vision and he sees the seraphim and they go to the altar and they remove a coal. Remember the story? Well, that one makes sense to me, because I would associate then a seraph with the ones who attend the altar, which is burning. So you go, well, the burning one, the ones who burn incense on the altar, coals on the altar. But a keruv, what does that even mean? I did a little bit of research, and maybe you did as well. But one of the things that I wanted to do was I said, what does keruv mean? Now, in Hebrew, if you look up in a lexicon, what you're going to find in most of the works that are behind me, I looked in Halot, the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament. I looked in Brown Driver Briggs. Most will point you to an Akkadian root, which is tied to the idea of prayer. It says to pray or to consecrate or to bless.
To bless,
and keruv. Now, I don't know if this is related, because typically Semitic languages don't work this way, but I do find it of interest that if you take those root letters, Kaf, Resh, and Beit, and you flip them, you get the word Barak, which means to bless, to kneel. It's almost like it means the same as the Akkadian word if you reverse the letters. Does that make sense? Because there's not really a Hebrew root that the lexicons will point you to, but it says it's from another language. So I don't know. So are these beings, living creatures, these angelic type? I'm using angel because most people often associate the types of angels, the seraphim, the cherubim, but we don't really get that from the biblical text. It does not, to my recollection. You know of any place where a keruv is called a malach, which is the word translated angel? I can't think of one.
As in a messenger? Not off the top of my head.
Yeah, me either.
No, it is really curious. Talking about the etymology, Ross, I mean, you mentioned the Akkadian. I've also read that the Aramaic ruvya, I'm just reading here, according to Rabbi Abahu, a cherub had the face of a child. He bases this on a wordplay between the Hebrew keruv and the Aramaic ruvya, utilizing the presupposition ke to make up for the otherwise missing first letters. The suggestion is clearly a midrashic etymology, and the idea is that in the face or the appearance is childlike, like a lad.
Oh wait, so that may be where they get the idea of the little fat, cute angel. And look, I'm not making fun of fat. Don't get me wrong, because nothing's better than a cute little fat baby. Yeah, little fat cheeks. I love that.
Yeah.
Maybe this rabbi pulls this out. Okay. But again, sometimes when people get into these etymological origin, etymology and things, I think they pull them out of the air. That's the nice way to say it. They just, I don't know where they get some of this stuff. But we don't know.
That's fairly early on, that connection to the Aramaic. And then I think other connections are made in as far as I think the Greek god Eros and the Roman equivalent, which is, help me out, Cupid.
Oh yeah, Cupid.
Yeah, and
Cupid,
and they're all,
pull back your bow. Isn't that the 1950s song? Some of you might know.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, you like that?
Very good.
Hey, so let me say this. You and I touched on this a little bit in private conversations about these where they occur in the text. 91 times we find this idea of the cherubim. 91 times. There's a big gap.
Any other angelic being, is it mentioned this frequently, Ross?
No, not. It's mentioned more than any other. I guess we would say. Can we say heavenly being? It's a really strange thing, and you mentioned a while back we have this one instance in Genesis chapter 3, and we leave our beings two. It's at least two, and they have these twirling, flaming swords, these lightsabers, as you call them.
Lightsabers.
We don't see them again until we get to Exodus, and then we start seeing them all over the place.
Right, but now, when we see them all over the place, and you know what? When I was, and I mentioned this to you off air, and we'll get into this later, but when I was researching for this topic once again, just to refresh my memory, seeing them all over the place, all of a sudden I'm seeing this and that, and they're far more prolific than I thought. Yep. You mentioned the program that we did on the Seraph, right?
Yep.
That program was called the Nehushtan.
That's right.
And the reason why we were talking about that one is because of the snake on the pole, right? Is considered to be a mosaic.
Snake on a steak. Snake on a steak.
Snake on a steak.
Yeah.
All right. So can I talk about that just for a minute, right? Because, and the reason why I bring that up is because that's one of two examples of a carved or formed thing that represents, something else. Is that fair?
Yep. Okay. All right.
And something and when to understand that this is divine in nature, that this is an exception. So what I'm going to do is just quickly read. I'm going to read from the Moses Scroll. Is that okay?
All right, go ahead.
Okay. This is after they obviously in the Moses Scroll it has the molten calf incident.
That's right.
And it also has the incident at Beit Peor, right, where idolatry plays a part in both of those.
Yeah.
And it says in DC5, guard yourselves lest you forget, and you make for yourselves a carved thing or a formed thing, the shape of any figurine which is in the heavens above, or which is on the earth below, or which is in the waters underneath the earth, and his anger, Elohim's anger, burn against you, and he destroy you quickly from that good land. Goes on to say, in regards to the 10 words, there shall not be to you you shall not make for yourselves a carved thing or any formed thing which is in the heavens above or which is on the earth below. You shall not bow down to them. You shall not serve them. Ani Elohim Elohecha. So it's fairly straightforward, and it's really
let me jump in. Let me ask you something. Let me ask you. So, because one thing that people have said in response to that's from the Moses Scroll, but they've also taken biblical passages which are very similar to that, probably derived from an early text, is what we believe, such as the Moses Scroll. But what they'll say is whoa. If you're telling me that you don't think that the snake on a stick or the cherubim on top of a golden box or whatever, if you don't think that that's really from God, they get upset because what they say, if I challenge and I say, why would God say don't make anything such as in the heaven above or the earth beneath or under the water, and then say, but put it on the box with the tablet which says don't make any creature from the heaven above or the earth beneath or the water under the earth. And they would say, well, that's an exception because it's in the holy place, which brings us to that's an excellent lead-in you have, because now when you get to the tabernacle, you get them on top of the box made by Bezalel and Aholiab. You get them all over the place, especially when you get to the temple, but they're woven into the curtains and they're woven into the veil, which is before what do you think? Is there
They are everywhere.
Everywhere you look.
Now I have, by the way, look at this. This is one of my favorite little trinkets. I love these little things, little figurines that I have here.
What is that?
Can you see this?
I can see it. It looks like a little pig.
It's a little brass pig. It's a little paperweight. I love this little guy. I've had this guy for decades. And he is a little carved or formed thing in the image of an animal, right, that roams the earth. Love this little guy.
You don't pray to it, though. Do you pray to it?
I don't pray to it. I don't serve it. I don't bow down to it. And that is the difference. Just to let everybody know, clearly the context of this commandment is within worship. Don't make these things within the context of worship. All right. So I got a question for you. Ready?
All right.
Is there a heavenly Nehushtan? Right. In other words, is the snake on a pole supposed to be a carved or formed representation of a heavenly entity, Ross?
Well, I tell you, that's a loaded question. My first instinct is to say, for now, no. But let me say this. It's interesting that what Moses is told to make is a seraph, and put that seraph on a nest, on a banner, on a pole. But Moses doesn't. This is from Numbers 21. It's not the class tonight, but in Numbers 21, he doesn't make a seraph and put him on a pole. He makes a nakash and put a nakash nakoshet, a brass nakash, and he puts that on a pole. But if he had made a seraph, would that have been in the form of whatever a seraph looks like?
Right.
I mean, would it have been sort of an angelic being? What if, and this is crazy, Jono, but I tell you, the thought that comes to mind, what if this thing that Moses held up, get ready, looked like maybe a man on a stake, some kind of the form of a human?
What about it? Because and this is the thing, because and certainly Christians would agree with that. Many Christians would respond in the affirmative and say that the snake on the pole represents the Son of God on the cross, despite the story of Hezekiah smashing it to pieces because the people were worshiping it. Yeah, that's absolutely a given. And we made a case that it's possible. Yeah, what you're suggesting, people can go back to that program and watch it. But if we had to answer the question based solely from the Hebrew Bible, while some might point to the seraphim mentioned in Isaiah chapter 6, and we do talk about that in this program, Nehushtan, it would be, and you would agree with this, and I think this is your point, it would be lacking the serpentile description, because what Moses seemingly makes is a snake on a pole, right?
Right.
So the question becomes, well, are they one and the same? We do talk about that. But then if we take, now the reason why I'm talking about both of these obviously is because these are both, as you've already pointed out, these two, the cherubim and the Nehushtan, seem to be the exceptions. And the question becomes, are they exceptions? Are they two exceptions, or are they two violations of the commandment that I just read? So the next question becomes, Ross, is the carved or formed cherubim representative of a heavenly entity? This becomes a question. And if so, what is their purpose? And if not, what is the purpose of the idols on either side of the Ark of the Covenant?
Now, and I think like you do, probably because we've been hanging around together. We've been hanging around together because we like the way each of us thinks, which can be a good thing, but could also be a bad. Most religious people, Jono, would have a problem with what you just said. So speaking on their behalf, I would say, how dare you? But getting past that, we have to ask the question, what do these cherubim look like, and are they supposedly looking like something in the heavenly realm, which is your question. Now, on the ark, let's just touch this, and we're not going to go too much into the ark we talked about because we're going to do a show on that. But on the box, in the English, it says the mercy seat, but literally in the Hebrew, it's just plain old cover. On the cover, there are two little, are they little fat angels like this? Look, you do this on your screen and I'll do this. This is what it would look like on the ark? No, of course not. What's on the ark, I think, would be more likely what we find in the ancient Near East associated with these beings. Now, I've got quite a bit here, but one Albright, everyone knows William F. Albright. Yes. This is from the Stone Age to Christianity. William F. Albright identified the prevalence of the mention of this cherubim to be sort of a sphinx-looking creature, a winged, sometimes with the head of a lion, but most often in the ancient Near East, that's what's described.
And very common in Egyptian imagery.
Yeah. And
in fact, we have examples of the box-type objects with a sphinx-type cherubim on either side guarding the box. We have images like that from Egypt. Go ahead.
That's right. And so just to quickly, without going into every text, people can do a search and read every occurrence of the word cherubim in the Hebrew Bible. But we were talking about this before the show. If you look particularly at the temple, now I know there are a lot of people who love the temple. They did in the biblical days too. The temple of the Lord, remember right before Jeremiah said God was going to destroy it. But they love the temple. But in the temple, more so than the tabernacle even, these creatures, these living creatures are everywhere. They're not only on top of the ark for as long as the ark was there, but they're standing, these two big ones, cherubs are standing with their wings touching in the Holy of Holies over the ark, upon which are two of these creatures. And then
now you just referred to these creatures as living creatures, and quite rightly you quote from Ezekiel, who refers to them as living creatures, and he goes into great detail.
Maybe we can read some of that in a minute. Yeah,
I'll let you do that in describing them. And so that kind of answers, at least from Ezekiel's perspective, they are on top of the ark. They are carved or formed images that represents an actual heavenly entity. So they're emblematic, if you like. They're not they don't necessarily serve a purpose of themselves there on top of the ark, but they are actually representing something that is real, personalities in and of themselves, as is the case in Genesis chapter 3. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so I was thinking, we'll get to the Ezekiel thing real quick, because in my mind, all I want to do is let people look these up on their own. But again, you have the two big cherubs, I'm using plural English, standing, wings touching over the two on the ark, and then you have the curtain has got stitched in embroidered work, more diagrams or pictures, pictographs of
Huge
these,
curtains.
and then on not only on the curtains, but if you go through, you'll see the veil, the curtains, the engraved on the walls. Now remember, the temple is built, the biblical temple in the first temple period is built by Tyrians, Phoenicians. And it's, if somebody says, well, I don't think there were pagan images, God wouldn't allow that. Well, the question isn't about God, it's about Solomon. And we know Solomon, he built all kinds of pagan stuff. The only thing he loved more than pagan buildings and stuff that violated God's commands was he liked girls that also liked it, and so he made temples for them too.
When you say girls, it's just he had many, many wives, and he appeased many of them by having many, many temples to various gods. At least that's what we're to understand from the text. Yeah, go ahead.
That's right. So then you have to question, is all of this part of the original plan of God? Does God want, you read from the Moses scroll, we could also read from the Pentateuch, don't make any representation of anything in the heaven above and so forth. So that's a big question. But whatever we come away with, people might decide differently on this, and that's part of the beauty of what we do is we want people to think, but what would it have looked like? And I think what we could do is maybe we can go to Ezekiel, unless you had something before that you wanted to do.
I'd like to touch on something that you said, and because what you were citing was, I think this is in Kings, but also in 2 Chronicles chapter 3. It's not as straightforward. For those who get offended at me putting things the way that I do, are not familiar with me, first of all, but secondly, you have to deal with some problems in the text. We've already touched on Exodus, where you mentioned the fancy ark and the golden decorations that include the idols of cherubim on either side of the ark, facing each other with their wings coming over the top. Now I'm going to use your Bible here. Where are we? 2 Chronicles chapter 3.
Okay.
Talks in detail about the temple and the decorations therein.
Yep.
And it gives us a different picture in that regard. Now it touches on, as you just mentioned, what is this? The so much. I mean, it's a major theme within the temple, Ross.
Oh yeah, the temple. Mm-hmm.
Look at this. This is from verse 10. In the most holy place, he made 2 carved cherubim and overlaid them with gold. The wings of the cherubim together extended 26. I mean, this stuff is big.
They're big. Yeah,
they're big. And let's see. He had the wings that touched each other. The cherub, and out of this cherub, 1 wing, 5 cubits. There's all these measurements here. The wings of the cherubs extended 26 cubits. The cherubim stood on their feet. Now, this is verse 13, facing the house. So here you have them facing in the opposite direction, which is problematic. And scholars highlight this, and they say, well, which was it? I mean, were they facing each other, or were they facing away from each other?
Yeah.
And there are ways to spin this, Ross. And it goes back to my question. The way that it is spun, it says that when there is, one rabbinic explanation that when Israel was obedient to God, the cherubim were facing each other over the ark. When Israel was disobedient, they would turn and face away. But then now we have a problem, because if the idols are representative of heavenly beings, right?
Yeah.
Well, then the heavenly beings are the reality of the situation. But here it seems like the golden statues have a life of their own, and they fulfill a purpose according to the obedience of Israel, or the disobedience of Israel. They seem to have at least some sort of personality and purpose there in that reality as well. Yep. Very confusing. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I tell you, I remember sometime back you brought this up to me, and I had never noticed that discrepancy. I don't know what to think about. In terms of my mind is really unable to get past the idea that we can read so plainly. And look, I know people are going to comment and say, well, you just don't understand that God said to do this. It seems conflicting to me, regardless of which way they're facing, to have them in the holy place to begin with, because it seems to be a contradiction. So I can't get past that to even consider that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Now,
right. And when it comes to consideration of, God said that you should do it, and therefore it makes it okay. Well, did he? And the interesting thing about the Moses Scroll, just to return to it just for a second, is the seventh commandment that says, "You shall not lift my name. You shall not swear by my name to deceive, because I will avenge the iniquity of fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation." Fathers who are telling lies or giving a kosher stamp to those lies by using the name of Elohim and attaching it to those lies, perpetuating it to the children and the children to their children, and so on and so forth, for lifting my name to deceive, says Elohim. Well, is this a case of that? Is this a case? It's a fair question to ask, that where God says and commands Israel, don't make these images, and then says, but on top of the box that you have, put these images.
right.
And by the way, make a nehushtan. Is this something that actually happened because it's a clear violation of the commandment, or is it a story that is spun and given the kosher stamp of Elohim's name attached to it, thereby compounding upon the iniquity? Well, this is a fair question, I think.
Yeah, some have proposed that what we see in Kings 18, in 2 Kings 18, verse 3 or 4, where Hezekiah destroys the Nehushtan, some have proposed that the people, the priesthood who came up with this idea, that they are writing anachronistically back into the text a story that justifies them making an idol. Because what we know happened in 2 Kings 18 is that the people had begun to actually worship this object. Yes. And so, but there's nothing that gives something a kosher stamp better than just saying, well, the Lord said we could do this.
God told Moses to do this, and we still have it to this day, so keep it up. I'm very much, I'll just let everyone know, I'm very much in favor of that proposal.
See, I'm going to call you a heretic. Now, listen, the other thing that we need to point out is that these cherubs, these cherubim, became associated with the throne of God, that God would sit upon the one who sat upon the cherubim. Let me read one verse.
I want you to do that, because this is where I'm going to go. This is my next question. Just to say, cherubim, nehushtan, none of this is in the Moses Scroll, of course, but what is in the Moses Scroll is the Ark of the Covenant. There is a box in which the stone tablets are laid, and there's one in Exodus that we're reading about now. You're about to give us some details on that, and we've spoken about this before, the fact that there are two boxes. So I wanted to touch on that as well. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll do the two boxes in a second. One thing I wanted to, because we can work our way down to the box from the golden idols that are placed on top. It says in 2 Samuel 22:11. This is one verse, which is also it's also Psalm 18 verse 10. But it says, he talking about God, Yehovah, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, rode on a cherub, Jono, and flew. He was seen upon the wings of the wind. And we get this idea, it's mentioned numerous times in the scripture, that God became associated with riding on the cherubim. We particularly see that very prevalent in the writings of Ezekiel, which we'll touch on in just a minute. But to make your point, and I think we'll touch this, you can say something about it too if you want. But the bottom line is there is an ark that is described in Exodus 25 and Exodus 37 that is built by two spirit-filled artisans named Bezalel and Aholiab. And it describes the dimensions of the box, what goes in it. It's called the Ark of the Covenant. And by the way, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers all refer to this as the well, I won't go there. I don't want to get too far into that. But so the box is described as being built by these two artisans. But if we look at Deuteronomy 10 and the Moses scroll, we don't get that at all, do we? What do we read there? So
what you're saying is right, and I would say that obviously Deuteronomy, these parts of Deuteronomy derived from the Moses scroll. The Moses scroll knows nothing of the fancy ark with the golden idols on either side. This fancy decorated golden ark. It knows of just a simple box that Moses made, right? Deuteronomy talks about this, of course, and it knows nothing of Nehushtan. It knows nothing of the cherubim. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it doesn't in Deuteronomy and the Moses scroll. If people don't know about the Moses scroll, they can read about it. But if they ought to know Deuteronomy chapter 10 is comparable to what we read in the Tetratuch in Exodus and Leviticus and so forth. Deuteronomy knows nothing of Bezalel and Aholiab's ark. It just simply talks, as you said, about Moses. Now, but what happens by the time we get to the late biblical period, particularly in Ezekiel? Ezekiel's been influenced by Babylonian and so forth. And Ezekiel has a vision in chapter 1. He's by the river Kabar. It tells us very clearly when it is. We know how far into the exile we are and so forth. And but it's strange, though, isn't it? Chapter 1 is describing what some have said, what is this, some kind of UFO, unidentified flying object? And it is in some ways, if you understand that the way I just described it. But it's a very bizarre vision. But by the way, nowhere in chapter 1 do we read mention of what is called the cherubim. But when we get to chapter 10, it's describing the same thing, and it says, these are the living creatures I saw in chapter 1. Doesn't say chapter 1, but I saw by the river Kabar. And there they're called cherubim. So can we just touch on the description of it? And then I want to get some feedback from some of our audience tonight on what they're thinking about this, because you have drawn a line and stepped across it, I think.
In chapter 1, verse 5, in the middle of it was something like 4 living creatures, as you said. This was their appearance. They were of human form. Each had 4 faces, Ross.
Wow.
And each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the soles of a calf's foot. They sparkled like, burnished bronze. There you go. It's my little bronze pig.
Yeah, not only bronze pig and bronze cherubim, but it's this bronze Nehushtan. People love making this stuff out of bronze. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to get to, what are the faces? Oh, here we go. They had the appearance, these are their faces. The 4 had the faces of a human being, the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left, and the face of an eagle, I'm assuming, at the back. Now, Ross, here's a thought. And as you say, we'll get to this in a minute, but just in a few chapters on, it identifies these living creatures as cherubim. If they have 4 faces, then it'd be fair to say that they're facing every direction. There you go. So they're both facing each other. They're both facing the house. They're both facing the site. They're facing everywhere. There you go. Problem solved.
Right. Yeah. Now, there is a problem, though, Jono. If I'm not mistaken, you just read that these cherubim had 4 faces. Is that right? Am I right so far? 4 faces?
Apparently, yeah.
And did you tell me that you said man, lion, ox, eagle?
Ox. That's correct.
Okay. Well, if you go to chapter 10, you get 4 other faces. You get 3 of the same. You get man, lion, and eagle. But instead of ox in chapter 10, it says the fourth face was the face of a cherub. But a cherub has four faces. And anyway, it's very,
it
very...
has 7 faces.
It has what?
That's okay. So this is right. So there is some commentary on this, Ross. Do you want to share with us some of the commentary as to why this is different?
Why? Okay. You tell me. I'm ready.
A cherub. Now, when we go back to what I was saying about the Aramaic, some of the rabbinic commentary says, well, a cherub, this is like in the Aramaic it says like a lad, so it's the face of a child. So therefore, but then they say, but of course a child is a human face. What's the difference between a human face and a cherub? So the cherub is like the child, and then there's the face of a man. Is what they're saying. And the reason why it's different here is because there was some sort of concern. God had some sort of concern about the cherubim having the face of an ox because it reminds him of the molten calf incident, displeases him. Get rid of your face. I don't like that face anymore. Here's a little baby cherub face.
Well,
problem solved.
See, I didn't know that. I didn't know that was the reason. I just thought that it was a discrepancy between chapter 1 and chapter 10, but that's interesting to know.
That's way too easy, Ross. We can't have that. We need some rabbinic spin to explain this away.
Well,
that's
tell you,
they can do with it.
Well, the thing
that a discrepancy in the text.
The thing that when I read this, I certainly it's almost an anomaly. We don't see many texts like this in the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible just doesn't have a lot of description of these. In fact, Ezekiel 1 and Ezekiel 10, to my knowledge, are the only two that have this description of these cherubim. Is there anything?
There is no other prophet that goes on with this sort of imagery, and it is to many, and particularly back in the day when the canon was, being developed, it was highly problematic. You and I did a program on this. At the same time, you and I agree that many of our favorite passages are found in Ezekiel. And as you found out recently, there is some spectacular overlay between the prophets and Ezekiel. And you were relaying some of that to me, and it really is. I can't wait until you do
I know. Think about this. In the future.
Saturday morning on that.
In the future, I see that, we've got a lot of work ahead of us for the Northern Prophets study that we're working on now. But I could see in the future that Seth and I could do a major study on the book of Ezekiel. I think it would be really, really interesting. And even though we're having a good time and we're talking about these things, it really is out of a concern for what is the authentic, original, and if there are problems, if there are difficulties. So here's what we know, and we're going to do a show on this in the near future. When it comes to the Ark of the Covenant, it's a very major component of what we read about in the Pentateuch, in the Torah. So if it's that important, and it contains the very testimony of God, then we ought to get this right. So the question becomes, and this is where I'll kind of leave it in your court. Maybe we invite some of our guests to come on, but the question would be, which one of the arks more accurately reflects the truth? Is it a box made by two spirit-filled artisans, Bezalel and Aholiab, with angels, golden angels on the top? Within the box it says, "Don't make anything in the heaven above or the earth beneath the water." Or is it a plain box that Moses made, like Deuteronomy? I think it's probably like the latter. I think that you and I would agree on that. But we might be the only two that think that. Who knows?
That's all right. That's fine. No, I really am. I'm interested in what people have to say. So if you have something you'd like to add to this, then by all means, raise your hand. We'll bring you on.
That's right. We're looking for if anyone has any comments that we'd love for you to share that with us tonight. We're glad that you joined us. If you don't have any comments, we'll keep going for a few more minutes. But I tell you, this study it reminded me, Jono, as I went back through these texts. I looked at and we talked about this before we came on the air. I looked at those texts, particularly in the building of the Beit HaMikdash, the temple. And you certainly have these beings everywhere. Now the question becomes, because maybe the idea that I've heard people say, well, you guys don't understand. They weren't idols. You mentioned even, Jono, that to violate the command, you have to associate it with worship. Like, for instance, your little bronze pig there. You're not, to the best of my knowledge, you're not offering up sacrifices to it, and you're not. I mean, I hope you're not, and you're not praying to it. You don't rub it and hope for rain or anything like that.
No.
But
I don't do that.
So what if people said, well, it's the same with these angels? Catholics tell me all the time, we're not praying to the statue of Jesus. It's just to get us focused. Maybe this was like that. We've got Joshua Chisholm ready to come on stage.
Hey, Josh. So the question is it within the context of worship? And it would be difficult to escape the answer, yes. I mean, it's absolutely within the context of worship, and it's the most heavily mentioned angelic being.
Yep.
In the Tanakh. Go ahead, Josh.
Hey, Joshua, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good night, guys. Can you all hear me?
We can hear you fine.
Right on. A lot of great points. My question is, in our discussion, are these these texts about the cherubim, are these more like metaphors from the text?
Right. So this is the question: are they symbolic or are they actual realities? This is the question.
Yeah. Give me a little more on that, Joshua, just so I follow. You say when they, like, for instance, where it says that God rides upon the cherub, are you asking, is that a metaphor, or are we to take that literally, or is that what you're asking?
That's exactly right. Like I'm thinking about all the scriptures I know where it mentions specifically cherubim, and we don't know exactly what they look like. We have these descriptions from Ezekiel. They're mentioned all the way back in Genesis.
Yeah.
And I'm not a reductionist or a minimalist by any stretch of the imagination, but when I first read that in Genesis, my mind kind of went to, I wonder when Adam and Eve were expelled, if those cherubim that are talked about in Genesis were something like volcanoes. I mean, God could use anything to send his message. They don't necessarily have to be heavenly beings. And also, when we're talking about heaven, are we talking about the fourth heaven, or are we talking about the third heaven?
That's it's interesting that you raised that. Maimonides took a similar approach, I think, when it came to the cherubim and angels in general. My understanding is that he said that they were actually allusions to various laws of nature, and I think that's what you're proposing. Is that right?
I wonder about that sometimes. I wonder, if these are actual beings with, self-determination like we have, or if they are elements of nature or physics that God uses, and I don't know one way or another, and I'm certainly not a great scholar and haven't studied about these things very much at all, but I've been reading the Bible since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And these are questions that come to mind.
Well, let me ask you this, all of you. It's something that comes to my mind. Of course, I like to think, I've been, like we all have been reading the Bible our whole lives, and I've always imagined this angelic type being, and they're guarding the way into the, so I don't know, but I tell you, whenever I read these texts, I try to put myself in the writer's mind at that time. I would propose, and this is just a proposal, I would propose that the biblical writers actually did believe in these beings as heavenly beings. I think, how literally do I think that they thought that God rode upon the cherubim? I get the impression when we read the text that there is this idea that they literally believed that these beings were some sort of heavenly being. And like you said, Jono, we see them in Egypt. We see them all over the ancient Near East. So they certainly had the idea that in the other world, there were these living creatures. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just in my mind. I think they believe that.
I think that makes good sense to me. I mean, I wonder, if this, because if it's in the other world, that's kind of in the world of imagination, which would obviously lend itself to philosophy and their own personal values in terms of faith, which, I very much identify with personally. But I also wonder, were there things in the physical world that they looked around and saw and thought, maybe this is a physical representation of what's happening in the other world?
Yeah. It's a good question. I tell you, whenever we read these stories, I remember as a kid, even I used to always ask, "Hey, where is the Garden of Eden?" I mean, could somebody go look for it? I think I've always hoped that there would be some great documentary and somebody would actually find it. Not that they would find the cherubim guarding the way, but there is these stories are so compelling. And I think they've moved us for generations. So
further to Josh's point, I think let me read what Maimonides said in the Guide for the Perplexed. In this regard, he said, "For all forces are angels. How blind, how perniciously blind are the naive. If I told you, someone who purports to be a sage of Israel, that the deity sends an angel who enters a woman's womb and there forms an embryo, he would think this a miracle and accept it as a mark of the majesty and power of the deity, despite the fact that he also believes that an angel to be a body of fire 1/3 the size of the entire world. All of this, he thinks, is possible for God. But if you tell him that God placed in the sperm the power of forming and demarcating these organs, and that this is the angel, or that all forms are produced by the active intellect, that here is the angel, the vice-regent of the world, constantly mentioned by the sages, then he will recoil." He said, he goes on to say, "For he, the naive person, does not understand that the true majesty and power are in the bringing into being of forces which are active in a thing, although they cannot be perceived by the senses. Thus, the sage reveal to the aware that the imaginative faculty is also called an angel, and the mind is called a cherub. How beautiful this will appear to the sophisticated mind, and how disturbing to the primitive." So that's Maimonides' approach to it.
I'm perplexed.
I would argue that with everything we know about physics today, and Dr. Tabor has mentioned this as well in some of his pieces. When we think about miracles and the spiritual universe, this other world as we're talking about, how could the ancient people have distinguished between things that happen? Let me rephrase. The things that happen in our lives all around us, our physical reality, I think that there are miracles happening every day in the realm of, and I would wonder, are we disassociating the miracles that God is performing around us all the time from the text? And why is the text different or mystical than the very miracles that God performs around us today? The example of a child being, formed from the union of sperm and egg I would consider that to be a miracle. So that, I would agree with Maimonides in that respect. And I think that those are very thought-provoking questions. And when was Maimonides writing? How long ago was that?
Oh, well, I guess this is, when was Maimonides, 1100?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. I'd have to look. I could Google it real quick, but I don't know right off the top of my head. But I do have on my shelf the Guide to the Perplexed, but I've not read it. And, do what? Go ahead. Do what, Josh?
900 years ago, somebody was thinking about these same questions. And I certainly don't want to close myself off from thinking about miracles or angels, fiery beings or shiny beings, seraphim or cherubim. And even if they were metaphors from the text to describe something in a spiritual world that we couldn't see, I don't necessarily think that means that God's not showing us things from that world in our world today. And I often wonder from the prophet's perspective, were they seeing something in their imagination that God was giving them? Or was that coupled with things that they were seeing in the physical world with their own eyes or in their own dreams that was coupled with a marriage of the spiritual and the visual?
You're not alone. You're not alone in those questions. Absolutely. Maimonides was born 1138 till 1204. There you go. Go ahead.
That's what I was going to say. I just looked it up too. His Guide for the Perplexed is 1190. I tell you one thing, and I'm all about finding and putting in a historical context to the best that we can the writings that we love and cherish and seek to live our lives by. So, like for instance, when I read Isaiah, I'm looking for what is the association, what's going on in the world around him, as you know, if you listen to what I teach. But I do think, like you read Isaiah chapter 6, this is a very, very descriptive vision. Isaiah, at least in his mind, he finds himself in the throne room, and these beings, these seraphim, are there. Now, is this a dream? Or is, how literally do we take this? And the question becomes, when we read of these visions, in Isaiah it talks about the chazon. When we read in Ezekiel chapter 1, he sees in a vision, he's at the river Kabar. So again, how literally are we to take these? We tend to read these texts and we go, oh, well, the prophet saw it, so in the heavenlies these beings exist. But the question again becomes, are they actually seeing these? Like these beings really exist, or, is it something else that they see? I don't know.
I tend to think that whenever the prophets record their visions, they're seeing something that God's giving them in a vision. And I take that at surface level. They're seeing, a dream, or they're seeing a vision in their mind's eye. So anyway, thank y'all for letting me talk and ask questions. I really appreciate it.
That's great. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Josh. Yeah, and I'm glad. I had never read that, so I didn't know that piece. I learned something, Jono, on that. If there's anyone else that has any questions or comments they want to jump in, we've got a few more minutes before we close. One of the things that, again, I want to say that this leads us into all sorts of different ideas and questions, and if we next week, I think what we'll do is we will focus, Jono, if you're okay with it. I think it's suitable to do our show on Hanukkah, and I think we'll talk about that because 'tis the season, Jono.
'Tis the season, Ross. Why not?
Yeah,
'tis the season. Let's touch on that absolutely. We'll do that next week. Has anyone else got their hand up, or can we talk about what you're doing briefly on Saturdays now, Saturday classes?
Let's go ahead and do that. I tell you what the plan is. Seth and I are very engaged in a collaborative effort to bring what I want to teach with how he can make that a visual masterpiece. We're going to work together. I'm very excited about this collaborative project. We can't talk as much about it as I would love to, but it's going to be, the proof is in the pudding, as we say. We're going to take whatever time we need to do that. But don't worry, because we have a plan for Saturday mornings. We are going to be present on Saturday mornings. We're going to return to a following of the weekly Torah portions, the Pentateuch portions. And we're going to put those videos out week by week while we're working on this project. and I'll be there.
Let me ask you about that.
Yep.
While you are airing those, you're going to be there in the comments section to dialogue back and forth with people as they have comments and questions, right?
That's right.
So they can interact with you in real time. Nice.
Oh yeah, we will be live. I will be live in the chat. We're going to premiere these videos. After the video, what we're going to do is we're going to roll into a dialogue, just like we're having now. And all of those who participate in the premiere will have an opportunity to join us here in the UIWU Discord channel. So I think it's going to be a blast. It's going to be fun. We're working on that project, which is taking up most of our time. There are a couple of projects that we're working on associated with Shapiro research. Very, very important. Hopefully some of that will come to fruition. We'll be able to talk more about that later. But there is a lot going on, and I am looking forward to everything that's on the plate in front of us. We're again, one more point. We're not inclined to rush this. I think that if we take our time, we'll be able to come out with something really, really helpful for people, and I think it's going to be great. So,
looking forward to it.
Yep, that's right.
All right. So next week,
we're going to talk about Hanukkah, and look, Jono, the biblical significance. One of the most biblically significant dates.
This is what you're trying to tell me. This is what you're trying to sell me, Ross. I don't see it. I've got $20 writing on this. I don't think you're going to convince me. You're trying to tell me that Hanukkah has a significant date in the Tanakh, and we're going to find out next week whether or not you are going to convince me of that.
That's right. And if I don't, you know, I'll have to come up with $20. But if I do, I'm holding you to it, man. And I don't know.
All right.
The exchange rate, I don't know if it's better for me to get $20 Australian or $20 US. Is that going to come into this? Or?
We'll figure it out next time when in Israel.
Hey,
and God willing, we'll be doing the Tanakh tour this time next year. We'll talk about that more some other time. But that's it. Are we done?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I saw a comment from Mike Perdue. He says, drink your gin and tonica. Do you know this, the Happy Hanukkah song by Adam Sandler? It's almost the season. I'm kind of getting excited. You know, I want to put some of that music up and maybe we'll have us a good time. And especially when I prove to the world that there is a very significant date associated with this. Hey, Jono, it's
you got to prove it to me first.
It's always fun talking with you, my friend, and we'll see everybody next week.
Well, good. Thanks for joining us, everyone.